Hey, hello everybody. Hello, Joseph Lyons. Welcome to tonight's stream. I almost didn't think things were going to happen. Normally I have my live stream control over on the Mac laptop, and while the pre-stream checks were going on, it decided it was a good time to just go ahead and install some level of updates. It says initializing software update about a minute, but it said that for the past 8 minutes and the screen just went black. So I'm doing it from my normal Linux machine here. How is everybody doing this fine Tuesday night? This is the first time that I've sat in this chair since my Friday night Twitch stream. We had Good Friday off here in Canada. I'm not sure if that's a holiday in other parts of the world, but it is here. And my wife also got Monday off as part of her job. I don't get that as part of my particular job, but we took Thursday off and I took Monday and both of us took Tuesday. So we have had a nice long weekend of more or less relaxing, if you don't count making vast quantities of cookies to share with the building in the lobby. It's the first time I've sat down in the chair here, and some exciting things have happened in the interim with various projects that have been going on behind the scenes. So that's pretty interesting as well. But probably looks like everything is going wellish here. I actually had a question that someone had asked me that I was going to answer, but sadly it was on the MacBook and it went away and I can't find it now. It is not. No, it's a carefully staged illusion. Although I do know technically enough now to make something like that happen. That's actually just a carefully styled web overlay that is the exact size of an image that I have pre-prepared. Much like the window that my face is in when I do this. A lot of people ask how I stream live webcam video into the window down here or into the big one, because I do the same thing in my videos. Sadly, the answer to that question is I have a static PNG image of a window that size that I cut the middle out of. It's transparent and I just plop it over top. One of the things I have been considering, though, oh boy, it's weird seeing this on this monitor. We'll get used to it. Is for Twitch streaming that I do, I could actually put chat text directly into that particular window. I'm not quite sure how we might work on the syntax highlighting for that. Probably something related to the way that it works for Terminus, but nevertheless. Now, before the stream started, Ayush asked me a question in the Discord about how to insert things into the status bar. Are you here, sir? He said that he already joined the chat. That is something that we could cover. And also, I left this here because I am running build 4101. I skipped right over build 4100 because it came out one of those days that I was busy not being anywhere near my desk. If you're not already using Override Audit, this is a good reason to perhaps have something like that. I got to point this way to point at the stuff that is for me up there. That's weird. But yeah, I have a couple of manipulations in... MacBook's still got about a minute to go, 10 minutes in. Good job on estimating times. It's really hard to get right. I have a couple of things in my particular instance of Sublime that is slightly different from what you might expect. The regex replace widget Sublime settings. I have something in there which sets the regular expression syntax. And that would be in the replace dialog box. This would be, I guess, that, which one is that? The replace. This makes stuff like this syntax highlight, for example. I guess because the default package changed, that is something that is not of that much of an interest. And I have this, I've covered this previously, paste from history, something else that I put in here, which makes my paste from history display in a quick panel instead of a menu. So if I was to copy some text and then jump over to the actual file, when I do this, I get to see something that has a lot more information in it than what the single line was. My override audit package is specifically designed to let you know when stuff like this is happening, because these two files are both replacing what ships with Sublime Text by default, and it's not going to tell you when this is the case. So what we can actually do here in this particular case, because I checked both of those and my changes are still everything that's in there, I can go ahead and freshen those, which just touches them on disk. Basically, the whole point of that is if it finds a file that is an override inside of the packages directory, and it determines that the Sublime package file where these things originally came from is newer, package must have been updated. Maybe these things are not fully up to date. He says he joined it, but he's not saying anything. Oh, and Hacky Sack is saying that he's going to be joining in as well. This is some exciting times. If you're not already aware, and if I set this up appropriately, I can't remember. The Discord has been set up, has been for a little bit while now, and if Nightbot is actively running right now, because I have been fiddling with it, eventually it might respond with a link to the Discord here in the chat. The delay for these things is just absolutely stunning. Even at ultra low latency, there's still a 7-second delay between when I say something and when you actually see it in the stream, which is extra weird. Great place. We've been having a lot of fun discussions in there about a variety of things, including something you may have noticed in yesterday's video. My little video editing area back there has, there you go, thank you, Nightbot, some art that we have finally placed up on the wall. Now, it took a long time to come. We had it hand-drawn as a commission by an artist friend of ours that we know on Twitch. And he got it done last year before Christmas, but we were waiting for a while for the Postal Service, because he's in the United States in Florida, to clear up before he could actually ship stuff over to us. Took a while to get it, a little bit longer to get it up on the wall. And if you join the Discord, you can see a better picture of the artist's conception of Walter, the cute little puppy currently sleeping under the desk right now, as a movie star, saving squirrels and bunnies from evil ninja cats. It's quite the operation. He gave us a few different choices for what we might like to see, and then we told him to go nuts, and he did. All right, so MacBook's still going. Everything seems to be, as far as I can see, checking stream health, everything seems to be going well. So perhaps we jump into some question and answer here, if anybody has any particular questions. Now, as I said, I had a question that somebody asked, but it went missing. I cannot find it now. YouTube is kind of the poops when it comes to letting you know about comments. Sometimes it sends notifications, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it sends mails, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it will send you a mail for a new comment, and then when you go look to see comments that you haven't replied to, it doesn't show up. It's a very tricky thing indeed. It was something related to build systems. There was a couple of them, but Ayush had a question about wanting to be able to insert something into the status bar, if I'm correct. Let's go ahead and close that. We want set. The thing that you want for that, Ayush, is the view.set status. Oh, absolutely no problem whatsoever. Thanks for joining on in. I'm going to double check here that there's not some stuff happening. I guess, oh, I see. Yeah, you have to, you can watch the YouTube broadcast anonymously and Twitch, but you can't participate in the chat unless you are logged in. So I gather the thing that you want to do is add some sort of text to the status bar. This is the question that Ayush had in the Discord just as the stream was starting. The answer to that question is to use this view.setStatus method. This is a method that is available on the view class, which is what represents files that happen to be open in the window. And just for the purposes here, I'm going to make sure that this actually has the focus so my keystrokes don't take random actions. If I have two files open here, right, I got this one on the left and this one on the right. Each one of these two things is a distinct entity in and of itself, as evidenced by the fact that if we see down in the status bar here, this is line 753, column 16. This is line 1, column 1. The information that you see in the status bar reflects the tab that's currently focused in the window, which of course also makes sense because on the far right-hand side, below my head, down there we go, and down in this area, that is where you're going to see the type of file. That's different for type of file as well, right? Now this takes two values, key and value. Key can be absolutely anything you like, but important to note that if Sublime doesn't have the input focus when you press keys, things don't do what you want. Let's clear this console up here just so we have something to see here. View.setStatus is what you want. Now, if you're doing this from a plugin, you would get the view from somewhere else. You might have a text command, in which case you have self.view. If you have a window command, you have self.window, and you can say, my goodness, it's going to be one of those nights. You can say window.activeView to get access to the view that's currently focused in any particular window. A few different ways to get something like that. Some API methods also give you a view as well, like event listeners, for example. View, once you have the view, set status is the thing you want. The thing you want up here is the key and then the value, like so. And if I was to do this, you can immediately see, hopefully, maybe a little tiny to see, but there's text right there that says value, because that is this. Key is the text that's used to uniquely indicate what text you've added to the status bar. It can be anything you like, but all plugins share it. So probably best practices are to use some sort of namespace on this, put some sort of prefix on it that represents your package or your name or something that someone else isn't going to pick to make sure that they don't collide. If they do, not the worst thing in the world, but there'll be a little bit of an overlap there. Now, every time you call this, you can change the value. So it can say some other text like this. And we can see the text changes from value to some other text. So every time you use the same key, you're altering what appears in there. And these stay in here forever until you close the file or erase them with this view.erase status. And remember, these are specific to the view. So if this file on the right was the one that has the input focus, you see it doesn't say down here some other text. But when I switch back over to this one, it does. And I should probably maybe do a little bit something like this. We'll see how well that may or may not get in the way. Is it turned on by default? Okay, so there we go. That's the key that I pressed to do that. I'm basically pressing here Control 1 and Control 2 to switch the focus in between those two panes there. This is something that we were playing with last Tuesday. And so that we got that going on. We're going to turn that off. We'll see if it'll actually go away. If not, I will have to kill it. So the other thing to note about this is that the key that you use in this set status call specifies not only the text, but to some degree its position in the list of things here. Because more than one thing can call set status to add text to the status bar like this, and they're added in alphabetical order by key. So if I was to say, for example, view.setStatus, and the key was AAAA to make sure that it sorts all the way to the very first thing, then this could be I am on the left, and we can see that one always appears to I am on the left, comma, some other text. Similarly, if you were to change this to something that sorts all the way to the end, like this, then this one would be I'm on the right, and that one will always appear to the right of everything that doesn't sort there. These are items that will add this in permanently. The only two ways to get rid of them, as I said, is to close the file, or you can say view.erase status, like so. You provide the key, so these will delete all out in that particular order. So let's see, 5Z's gets rid of that one, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 A's gets rid of that one. If you want to just display a message there for a few milliseconds and then have it go away, the two things that you could do for something like that are call set status, and then after some delay, call erase status, or there's another message for that, and it is status message, pardon me. Now, I think you want this one, window.status message. There's also one This method is also available on the Sublime top level menu, but that one is deprecated. This is an old API. It's been replaced by window.status message, which is why I would recommend this one. But in this case, you'd say window status message and then say I am a temporary status message, like so. And you'll see it's tacked onto the end, and then after a little bit of time, it goes away. Only one thing can be doing that at a time, so if multiple plugins try to do it, the one that does it last wins. And it's also worth noting that messages about that Sublime generates in there, like when you save a file and it says how many things are that the file has been saved, that counts as this, so you can't display a window status message at the same time as that. That's an unfortunate side effect. But what you could do is something like the item that we already had in here, set status, we'll call this my key, and say I am a message in the status bar. And then you could also say Sublime, set timeout, and the timeout would be a lambda, and you might say something like view.erase status my key, and the time delay on something like that might be, say, let's say 5 seconds, so 5,000 milliseconds. Haven't tested this. We'll see what happens. I hit it. That message is displayed in there. It's displayed at the left, and if we wait 4 or 5 seconds, it automatically goes away. So that's another way that you could do something like that if you wanted to position your message somewhere in a specific part of the status bar and still have it magically go away on its own. What are you working on that you're doing stuff like this, Ayush? Just out of curiosity, because you've asked a couple of questions about inserting text into buffers as well. It's always interesting to see what people are creating in their plugins. No problem. And that is what we're here for, to ask these Sublime questions. I wish that I could find, let me look again over here in this window, because the MacBook still has not started up, and I'm not fully sure that the file that I had there is actually going to come back. Let's see, if we're looking at comments. 8 minutes ago, someone asked a question about why Sublime gives permission denied errors and how to fix them. And I'm going to like that and say, glad I could help. Awesome. Glad I could help. Reply. I tried to make a plugin over my vacation last week with the API. Didn't support oh, what were you trying to create? Sometimes not everything is possible, but sometimes there's ways sort of around it. Was there something related to the sidebar? Astute viewers might point out that I'm drinking both coffee and tea here, because that's just how it goes. Not at all. Everybody that writes Sublime plugins now or is a software developer now didn't always have the knowledge that they have. We all started out not knowing a lot, and we used time and practice to get to where we are. So never feel embarrassed about asking a question. Everybody has them. Related to things that people have asked me, please create a build system for Python in which the code will run in Windows command prompt. And the answer I gave was, I have a video for that. And the response was, I know for Terminus, I want to open an exterior command prompt window. Hello, Ben. It's going to help this person out here. I had a question that somebody had asked me in a file, or a temporary file open in my MacBook, and it spontaneously decided that it needed to install updates without asking me first. Apparently, all those times I said, ask me again later, it got a little tired of it. We're going to get a video link. That, yes. Yeah, that's not currently possible to change the size of that, except I think, as Ashwin probably mentioned, it's something that's stored in the workspace /session information, but contriving a way to quit Sublime to rewrite the sidebar information in the session and then restart Sublime is probably more work than and invasive than anybody wants to go to. Also, as Ben can attest, the information in the this is something that Ben said anyway, but I'm sure Ben could attest to it as well. Information in the session/workspace isn't documented like on purpose, and Sublime HQ isn't shy about changing that as and where needed. So don't poke around in there. Although I do, of course, have a script that pokes around in there, which I think is actually obviated now. I have a video for this. Easily execute a build in an external window on Windows. That's the one. So we're going to say, you may find this video helpful on how to do this, and paste that one in, and away we go. Indeed, it's going to break. It's going to break hard. You don't know when it's going to break or how it's going to break, but whoop. Like I said, that said, there is a session cleaner script that I have in the scraps repository that was for cleaning projects and repositories out of the sessions for Sublime Text and Sublime Merge if they no longer exist on disk, but that functionality has been added natively to text, at least. I assume Merge has the same thing. I'm not entirely sure. I end up with more sample projects in text than I do repositories in Merge that no longer exist. So as a matter of fact, for my own personal usage of Sublime, I have over here lists of Sublime Text 4, 3, 2, and a couple of other versions of these. These just launch specific versions of Sublime specifically. For a long time, the one up here, which you can't see, it's behind the chat, but I have one up in the status in the taskbar here, runs a script that runs that Python script first if Sublime isn't already running, and then starts Sublime. But I haven't needed to use that in a long time, so I swapped that out. Someone asked if I could help them, and the answer to that question was yes, but that's not as helpful as it could be. On my laptop, Sublime gives no error, but with the same setup and path on my PC, it gives access denied. I have MinGW installed. Is that the same person that said something up here? No. I'm going to... Hang on. Let's do a thing here. If anybody else has any question while I'm trying to find this other one, feel free to jump in. And also, what do we think about the latest builds of Sublime Text? I'm currently running version 4101 here. I skipped over 4100 on this machine because this is the first time I've sat down at this desk in 3 days. That's going to be get link for this one. This is why we created this particular package and plugin. Could be for one of the reasons outlined here in this video, or it could be due to virus software. I can't remember. Virus scanner. Do your antivirus software. This is exciting, isn't it? I can't remember if that's actually covered in that particular video or not. I think I mention to it that, and I don't know how long this has been happening, but various antivirus softwares, including mine, flags anything generated by MinGW as heuristically a virus. From here, that is blindingly white because YouTube doesn't know how to make a dark mode to save their lives when it comes to the studio. But this is the list of questions that I receive on my YouTube channel. I've answered most of them, but I like to come through here every now and then because As I mentioned earlier, I have all of the settings set in all of the places to tell YouTube, please let me know when someone posts a question on one of my videos. Occasionally, I will get a notification from the YouTube app itself and from the YouTube Studio app, which are both on my phone. Sometimes only one of them gives me notifications and not the other. Sometimes neither one of them do. Sometimes I get an email to the email address that is associated with my Google account for my YouTube channel to tell me that there was a question. Sometimes I get that in addition to one of the notifications, and sometimes I get none of those at all. So I need to go look through here, and occasionally it'll tell me that someone has asked a question on a video, but the list of questions over here, that window I just had there, has a list of published questions and questions that are held for review. It doesn't appear in either one of those particular sessions. And also there's a special setting in here for questions that have been asked that I haven't responded to. 50% of the time it doesn't show up in there at all. So if you're watching this live or after the fact, you've ever asked a question and I didn't get back to you, within 24 hours or so of your question, I'm really sorry about that, but YouTube makes it incredibly difficult to interact with the audience in a way where I can answer these things. And the reason I'm looking through here is because on Sunday or Saturday, someone asked me a question on YouTube. I didn't get a mail about it. I only got a notification in the app, and my phone rebooted and the notification was lost. And it had to do with creating a build system with Terminus that splits the view and reuses the panel, which is something that I have covered. And I wanted to go over it in the video because I can't quite remember. There was something else about it, but the laptop that I had the question on rebooted itself. Well, I think it may or may not have finally decided that now is time to come back. Thank you, Apple. Your just a minute has taken 27 minutes to actually finish, and it still can't talk to iCloud, and you're never going to be able to. Please go away. Bring all my applications back. That is neither here nor there. So I was going to answer that question. Unfortunately, it has been lost. This is something that we have covered in a previous video, though, but it goes a little something like, you might want to create a build system that, echoes hello world or something. And you might want to run that. Let's save it first. We'll save it as echo.sublime build, and then swap in the appropriate build here. Echo, like so. So when we hit the build, it displays the thing down at the bottom of the window. Ground shaking? Absolutely not. But you might want to use Terminus exec for something like this, in which case you also want a cancel key. You want Terminus cancel build. If you did something like this, then every time you run the build, you get a Terminus panel. And because Terminus is running in a panel, it's going to recreate that panel every single time. It doesn't seem like it is because it always takes 0.07 seconds for something like this, but it is recreating that panel each time. If you wanted to have your build running in a tab instead of in a panel at the bottom of the window, then you need to use Terminus open instead, and don't include a cancel because it's not going to be called. And now when you run it, you see the tab quickly appears and then immediately disappears again. And that's because Terminus, when executed in a tab, expects that you want it to be open while the program is actually running, and then when it's done, you probably want the tab to go away. And for the general purpose of creating a terminal, that's exactly what you want. You want to have a terminal open in a tab somewhere on the left or the right of the window or something, and be entering your commands in, and then when you hit Control D, tab goes away. That makes perfect sense for something that person might actually want to do. Let's make sure we're looking at the appropriate thing here. If you wanted to use it in a build system, not that exciting unless the program that you're running is something interactive that you are going to be in charge of when it terminates. Like a Python REPL, for example, would be a good example of that. Maybe when you tell the REPL to exit, you want the tab to go away, in which case you don't have to do anything special. Or if you're running some sort of text mode game or something. For other things, you need a tag in here. Sorry, an argument of auto close, which I'm going to set to false. We'll see if I'm remembering this because this one is a little bit from memory, but that is not the one. Shoot. We may need to restart that. Let's double check here. Space. There we go. Okay. Almost got her there. Now, it doesn't automatically close this panel. And as a side bit, you can also say time it true in here. If you want Terminus to execute something and then tell you how long it took. You might note that this now looks exactly how it looked when it was running in a tab down at the bottom of the window, and that's because that's exactly what it is, right? Terminus open is the de facto command included by the Terminus package for creating terminals. It can also create panels at the bottom of the window as well if you give it the appropriate arguments. As a convenience for use in a build system, Terminus includes a Terminus exec command, which takes the same arguments that the exec command that normally is used to execute builds takes, but then it just calls Terminus open to do the job. And so Terminus exec and Terminus open, for that reason, take the same arguments. They just have different values. So Terminus exec has an auto close argument, but it defaults to false, like we have it here, because you don't want the panel at the bottom of the window to go away. That is entirely something you could do if you wanted to do something like that, though. The question that the person had was something along the lines of, I wanted to do this, but every time I do it, and I don't have that key binding in here, do I? It's just creating a new tab every time, which can be a little bit irritating if you have a bunch of these things. And the answer to that question is to add a tag to this thing. We can call this echoer, for example. And now when Terminus creates this particular tab, it's going to give it a tag that represents it. And then every time you do the build, it just reuses the exact same one. That's about 80% of the question that the person had. This is something that we covered in one of the videos of supercharging builds with Terminus, if I had to guess. There was something extra about it, though, and as one might expect, this came back. Interestingly, the Live Control Studio came up, and it knows I'm online, so that's nice. So if this tab goes away, that'll still be working. That's cool. So I was looking to see if I could find that question again, but it appears to, like the questions that appear in here are all at the top of the window are all labeled 4 days ago or a week ago. Unless that person deleted their question, but I never actually answered it. I'm pretty sure that the question would have been answered by that video, so maybe they found it, but unfortunately I can't go far from there. Can you discuss why you enjoy Sublime more over some of the newer editors on the market? Oh, no, questions are absolutely perfect. I think I may have covered this at some point before. I'm not sure if it was here or on Twitch, but the general progression of editors that I've used over the last 20 years or so is, for a long time, my editor was Vim, and I would have two windows open at any given time, like so, on multiple monitors. Actually, if we want to be perfectly honest, if I did this is the terminals that historically I would use and that I tend to use. This is goldenrod on light slate gray, but it doesn't quite show up as nice. This is a regular X term on stream, so I tend not to use that particular one. And I would have one monitor here, another monitor to the right, which I currently do, so two windows on either one of those, and multiple workspaces that also had multiple things, and I would just VI in these bad boys. And for 20 years, this was how I edited files. I might have one of these windows split vertically or horizontally from time to time into two rows if I wanted to look at a little something inside of one window. But by and large, I basically work the same way that I work in Sublime now, where the main file would be one window, and over on this window over here would be something that I'm referring to. So if I'm working on code that uses a library, that would be the code I'm writing over here. And on the right, under the chat, would be the actual header file for this thing. And for a long time, that is how I did all of my work for everything, at work, hobby work, and everything. And I went through a period of time where I was working with some web-related stuff, not anything nearly like web development as we know it today, just working on some simple web pages with JavaScript. And I am also have been a long-time hobby game developer. And in order to create games that I could work on my Linux box and then also just swap over to the Windows machine and do something there. The two ways that I would do something like that would be Java for something more full-featured and a web-based game. For example, ones that I've showed off previously on streams, like RX, the Dr. Mario clone I did just as a simple little programming exercise and got an NDA from Nintendo. In order to work with both of those languages, I eschewed using VI because as much as I am an old fuddy-duddy, not a super fan of IDEs in the general sense, because I spent most of my coding career working in tools that didn't really have that level of code intelligence. I mean, VI has a lot more power to it than I tend to use as well, because it wasn't available 20 some years ago, perhaps in earlier versions of Vim, or we just never set it up to work with because the languages that we were working with, largely Objective-C, didn't really support that sort of thing. Java, on the other hand, I am of the opinion that if you're working in Java, get thee to some sort of an integrated development environment for Java, because life is too short to canoodle around with the tons of files that all have to be in the exact right location in a directory structure and all of that business. So I spent a while using IntelliJ tools, specifically JetBrains IntelliJ for Java stuff and WebStorm for web stuff. And also I had CLine for a while, and I did iOS development using AppCode on the Mac over there that just rebooted itself. What brought me to Sublime was irritation with the large, slow, bloated nature of those particular tools, because they were written in Java. So nicely, they more or less look and work the exact same across all operating systems, which is something that I personally am a fan of, because I do use all operating systems. Anytime that there's some piece of software that I could use on this computer, but not on that one, or not on that one, or some combination thereof, inherently it's something that I'm a little sketched out by, because I want to be able to go to any machine and do the work that I want to do. So those tools, great for that, but so slow to start up, so mind-bogglingly large. They feel like, and maybe this is different because it's now been 5 years or something since I've actually used one of them. They felt to me like tools where the people who created the software had an idea in their head for how every web developer should work or could work, and everything in the editor was tooled around that exact workflow. You're going to do this, then you're going to do this. These are the tools you're going to use to do it. You're probably going to be looking to the left to do this. You're probably going to be looking to the right to do that. There's going to be 500 options in here for you to tweak some other stuff. It just never felt like a good fit for me. It always felt, all the time that I was using them, and I used them for a few years at least. I've went from IntelliJ 9 to like 14 or something along those lines before I eventually ditched. Whatever version was 2016, early 2016, that's when I jumped off of that train. It just felt slow, bloated, confusing, absolutely crammed full of tools that I didn't even know what they were supposed to be for. It wasn't anything I ever had to do for my stuff. Anytime I looked in options, I would be confused because there were options for Cucumber. What the hell is Cucumber? Even after all these years, I have no idea what Cucumber is in relation to some Java-related something or other. But for some reason, there was an entire pane full of options for cucumbering up my code. So the last straw for me personally was there were some bugs in it that were showstoppers for me. They wouldn't be for anybody else. they were just really nitpicky, constantly getting in my way kinds of errors. The prime example of which being, when I write comments, I write comments. I don't just write a line that says add 12. I put the logic of that in there. And it had really awesome word wrap, these tools, but they wouldn't wrap it correctly. They'd find a comma and then split the line at the comma, even if there was 30 characters. And I seem to be the only person that was experiencing them. They were very low on the totem pole. So that was like the last straw. This is just too buggy. It's too slow. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to go looking for other tools. And the first thing I came across was Atom, and I installed it. I was moderately impressed with it. I liked the idea of text configuration. There was like I think a JSON object that you could use to fiddle configuration stuff. I played around with that a little bit. It seemed like it might be kind of cool. And then I had to quit it. I went away. Yeah, I have no idea what Cucumber is even now. I'm pretty sure that's a thing. And that's just one example of that. There was tons of that in there. There's so many libraries for stuff. And IntelliJ specifically just installed all of them by default. It was terrible. My problem with Atom came when I had to quit it to do something else. And then I discovered that when I tried to install it or run it again, it didn't actually put an icon anywhere. So I immediately, after tracing down where it was that it actually dropped itself, which I believe I only managed to do by running the installer a second time, and then that time it actually did put a link somewhere, I stopped using that. The next thing I ran across was Sublime. Now this is the part where this gets kind of embarrassing because I don't know why this is the case. There's kind of reason for it, I guess, based on history as we know it. But in my head, I conflated Sublime Text with TextMate, maybe because they both have text in the name, because I'd seen TextMate previously, but it was Mac OS only. And at that time, I didn't have a Mac. And even if I did, that doesn't help me edit code on Linux or Windows, right? But Sublime Text did, in fact, work on all of them. So I thought, I'm gonna download this and let's see. Let's see if this will even work on my system, because as a side rider to this, I've mentioned this before, I work at a financial company working on large server backend stuff. A few years ago, we were doing the final migration to bring all of our code into the 16-bit world so that we could run machines with 256 gigs of RAM and have one process access more than 3 gigs of RAM, because life in the finance world is memory hungry if you're storing 4 billion messages in memory. But there were some systems still sprinkled throughout the company running bits and pieces of our stuff that were 32-bit. And we wanted to make sure that we had at least one developer that had 32-bit Linux installed with the same tools as those machines, so that we could verify here that things were going to work when they were deployed in the wild. And that ended up being me. Yours truly had a 32-bit version of Linux for a fair while there. Eventually, the migration effort was completed, and I could have moved off of it, but I just didn't for a while because reinstalling things is a pain in the butt, and time never really was of the essence. But anyway, all that is to say that I had a 32-bit version of Linux. Its version of glibc was not like super bleeding edge version of stuff, because again, it needed to be compatible with stuff that we were doing on some of those other machines. And I had run into a lot of cases where if there was software that I couldn't compile myself, precompiled binaries wouldn't run because they needed a version of glibc that came out 12 minutes ago or something like that. So I was mightily impressed that there was a 32-bit version of Sublime Text. I was even more impressed that it actually ran against the older version of glibc that I happen to have on this system. And then we saw basically what I'm looking at right now here in the window. It was just one big, well, I guess it looked like this, didn't it? If I was to close this tab and close this is what I saw. Different colors, but just this glorious, not 3 levels deep of super complicated toolbar buttons, so many of them that they have to have text underneath them so that you can tell which one of them is supposed to do what, because when there's 16 by 16 pixels to describe an action and you have 150 of the dang things in the bar, it's really hard to figure out where the one that you actually want to click even is, and then you got to try to figure out, what does the red square with the green rectangle on the top mean? Is that the thing that I want here? None of that here. There's not 5 panels docked on the left. There's not 3 panels docked on the right. There's not 7 panels splanged across the bottom. It's just this. And I can put text inside of it and see the text and work with the text. That immediately caught my attention, why I thought Sublime was a great tool. And then, of course, you do the thing where you do preferences, settings. Of course, in those days, it didn't open in a window like this. You had the menu items for opening this as a separate file and this as a separate file. And look at these options. There are textual options in here, yes, but they all have a comment that says exactly what they are. Easy to search to find the one you want. Easy enough to just copy the ones that you want to change over here, leave everything else alone. That part seemed very easy right off the get. It was at this point, that same day, that I decided, how much does this thing cost? I'm getting a license for this thing. I don't even know at this point if Sublime is going to be something that I'm going to want to use on a daily basis, but it was just so refreshingly awesome that someone had created a tool for developers that understood the idea that the files that we edit as developers, that is like the most important thing. Why are other things having to use super little teeny tiny fonts because there's so many panels crammed all over everywhere, giving me information that I don't know what it is, and I have to like pin them if I want to keep them open. I never really got into the habit of using a method navigator on the side. Using the symbol navigation here seems so much an easier way to go that I just bought this. I bought my license and said, I have to support a developer that can come up with software that gets it, that actually runs on this manky old version of Slackware of all things. Because I do run Slackware Linux. I was running an older version of Slackware Linux at that point. If you look for any software across the internet that says that it supports Linux out of the box and any distribution is mentioned, I would be willing to place a very hefty wager that you are statistically negligibly ever going to see Slackware in the list of Linux distributions that software says that it supports. So the fact that this worked was also great. And of course, from there, the rest is history, I guess. I just started playing with the idea that the shoe is on the other foot, whereas in IntelliJ tools, the idea from the developers is, what if we came up with every possible tool for every possible language and extension and library ever invented by anyone throughout all of humanity for Java, and just crammed every single one of them into one gigantic bloated piece of software? Wouldn't that be awesome? And Sublime's version is, what if I just gave you an application that allowed you to edit text, and then you could find functionality that you like and add it in. And then it would work the way that you want it to work. You could make it work the way you want to work instead of being forced to work in someone else's workflow. And that just really resonates with me as an excellent idea for software, which is, like I said, why I bought this within, it can't have been more than 24 hours. I'm pretty sure it was the same day that I first started using it that I bought the license. I've been using it ever since, which means that since that was 2016, when Sublime 4 is officially released, I'm going to have to drop money for a license, and like gladly will do so. If there was a payment portal open to do it right now and upgrade this license, I would do that very thing. So that's pretty much that in a nutshell. Also, what got me into Python, because I was never really interested in that previously. And I just, for reasons that and this is the part I don't actually understand about any of the stuff that has happened throughout my time working with Sublime, and that is that historically at work, my 3 jobs are to design and architect the software that we work on, and to implement the actual design that we create, and to provide support for it. That is to say, anytime somebody wants to know why this thing didn't price or why that thing didn't price or what's wrong with this, what does this error message mean, it would fall to either me or my coworker to respond to the email and say, this is the reason for this, that's the reason for that, this is why this doesn't work. And that's not super fun in the capacity of a maintenance developer that has to write code and maintain code and also support code. It informed what we did in our code to try to minimize as much as possible the questions that people might ask, or to make it easier for us to get their answers to them, which mostly involved manipulating data. But that's just sort of a weird thing, right? It seemed very natural to me that using Sublime for the first time, there seemed to be a lot to learn. Learning about key bindings for the first time. I remember being confused about the idea of adding arguments to key bindings as compared to how you defined an actual command. I was looking at some plugins. It took a little bit of a time to work that out. But I really enjoyed learning what there was to know about Sublime and all of the ins and outs of, the different settings and what they do, the plugin system and everything like that. And I just became, my thing to go on the forum and see if anybody had a question and then see if I could answer it. And sometimes I might know the answer right away and I could provide an answer. And sometimes I would see someone ask a question and say, yeah, why is that? Why doesn't that work that way? Or what is going on here? And that would be the impetus to come over to this window right here, as a matter of fact, and fiddle around and see if I could come up with the reason for why things were the way they were. And then I could go over to the other window and reply. And that has basically been the last 4 years of my life, helping people on Stack Overflow, helping people on the forum. Occasionally, I try to help people on Reddit as well. I don't go to Reddit nearly as often. And now here on YouTube as well, I answer questions for people. I never would have thought that I would be that into helping people with what basically amounts to tech support questions. But for some reason, there's just something oddly compelling and very enjoyable about helping people with the problems that they're having with this software. The shorter answer to your question, why I enjoy Sublime more, it's nicer. I don't know that that's necessarily a better version of the story, but it's definitely a shorter version of it. Various versions of that story have sort of come across here, there, and everywhere in various forum posts or in the Discord or in live streams, but to this day, I have not used an IntelliJ tool since the time well, that's not true. I did start it once. Didn't actually use it. I did have it installed on the older system. One of the things that IntelliJ tools had was an option to every time you do something, it could say, you could do something this way to save a little bit of time. And then in the help menu, somewhere in one of the many buried menu items in there, was a dialog you could pull up that showed you how much time you saved using this feature to do something instead of that one. Someone had a question for being able to do something like that in Sublime, or they wanted to know if something like this tool in IntelliJ was available in Sublime, and I happened to have IntelliJ installed still. So I fired it up, went to get a coffee, came back, eventually it finished starting. And then I looked at that, and then that's like the last time I actually started it. Hey, no problem. And welcome, Hacky Sack. Yeah, and I should point out, I don't really have anything philosophically bad to say about the JetBrains tools, except that they're just very bloated and slow, and they confused the hell out of me. I have to imagine that if there's anybody in the world that's a Java developer, they're probably better at it than I am. They probably know what the hell a cucumber is, and they find those tools helpful. I, however, am not among their number. And to be fair to those tools as well, the IntelliJ or the JetBrains system as a whole is very modular. It has packages in the same way that Sublime has packages. They're a hell of a lot harder to create because you have to create them in Java, and you need to install a separate version of IntelliJ, for example, to create an IntelliJ package. You have to have a community installation of it installed to be able to have the code. It's like a whole big thing. It is possible with enough time to extract away and uninstall things that are providing support that you don't want, and eventually you can get it down to be fairly lean, but it's a long time consuming process. There's a lot of interdependencies between things that make it impossible to remove everything that you don't want, or it takes a lot of trial and error. And personally, I find it a lot easier to start with a minimal base and add on the 5 things I want than to start with the kitchen sink and remove the 100 things that I don't, personally. Android Studio. That's the version of like IntelliJ Community Edition that's set up specifically for Android, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't think I probably did something with that. I was using. Hello, Neon Tuts. Welcome to the stream. I would imagine I was probably using it for something like that too. The 2 big things that I would have used Java for back in the day that I haven't done in a while would be game development using crap. I can't even remember the name of that thing now. It's one of the 2 questions I've ever asked on Stack Overflow. Or the 2 at one time, the only 2 questions I'd ever answered on Stack Overflow. One of them was about that, like libgdx or something like that, Java library, and Android development, because as previously mentioned in other streams, GDX, that's the one. There you go. For the longest time, the only question that I had on Stack Overflow that I have ever managed to answer way back when was someone asked a question about libgdx, and I actually had an answer to that, and I got there before anybody else, and that got me like 50 cred over a period of like a year and a half, yeah, that and Android would be the 2 things that I would have done something for Java with. And then I sort of got out of, after I did all of the Android development that I was interested in doing, I kind of got out of that a little bit, and then I was doing development of games in GDX, and that sort of seemed like a little pokey. I switched to using HTML5 for my web development, playing with a few things. For example, Chrono Sneak, something that I've showcased in previous streams, and the aforementioned RX crude clone of Dr. Mario that got me a cease and desist from Nintendo, proving that I'm a real indie game developer, even though I've never shipped a game. Apart from that, I have not really used Java in a long time. If I was to use Java again, I think I would probably use something like NetBeans, I think. It was one of those, something that I didn't mention previously, but there was, when I went looking for other editing tools, I did a brief round of what if I wanted to still have something, a tool to do something with Java, what could I use to do something like this? And the big 3 were IntelliJ, Community Edition or not, so I lumped those together into one thing, Eclipse and NetBeans. And Eclipse also seemed kind of large and bloaty, in this, not in the same way as IntelliJ, but close-ish. And NetBeans, which always seemed a little bit more minimal to me, or maybe it defaults to the situation where there's not as much stuff installed. But in the end, I came to Sublime. I should also point out, as a part of that story, that the intention at the time was to just find something to do my web development stuff, the game development that I was doing. That wasn't one of those tools, and I ended up using Sublime for that, and it actually got me away from using the multiple windows of VI that I was using, because I can do stuff like have 2 windows, or one window split with 2 things, or with 4 things, or with other weird layouts if I wanted to have an extra column here and an extra column here and have all of these little different bits open and be able to easily jump around through all of them as needed and see code and jump to symbols and stuff. Just seemed like a whole lot nicer. Yeah, exactly. Like I say, I don't normally cotton to the idea of an IDE in general for a lot of, well, IDEs as they exist now, I guess is probably a better way to say that. I'm not like the most curmudgeonly person ever, as much as it might appear. I'm very much a, right tool for the job, and what one person considers the right tool for a job is different from what another person might consider the right tool for a job. There was a time when I was younger that I was very much Windows bad, Linux good, and Mac OS poop. But, over time, I've just come to the realization that neither one of them is really any better or worse in the grand scheme of things. It all comes down to what you're most familiar with or how you work best, what you know best. People that love macOS love it because maybe they're more familiar with using it, and if they try to use Windows, it doesn't work the same, and that makes them not work as fast, and that's a bad experience. And the same could also be said for someone that uses Windows all the time. You go to macOS, there's always room for you to discover that one operating system over another is giving you the ability to do something easier that you didn't realize that you needed. But, by and large, whatever gets the job done, right? But I mean, when I was first doing programming at the tender age of 10 in BASIC, there was, not an IDE for that, but there was special, software such as it is as the BASIC interpreter, right? That was just sort of built into the system. And then I moved on to Pascal, Turbo Pascal 3 by Borland, which actually had its own little mini IDE, not as we would know it today, but the idea of an editor with key bindings that you could use to actually run your code and stuff. And then move on from there to Turbo C, the initial versions of it, which had a textual IDE. It was still a regular text editor, but drawn in text on the screen. And then Turbo C for Windows, which was graphics and was in IDE, but really the same sort of like a graphical version of that. But IDEs over time, I think, have really turned into these, it's got to have an integrated debugger. It has to have the full help for a language built in. It's got to have all this code intelligence. That sort of stuff isn't stuff that I really came in to use much because I never really had a chance to use them. So I don't rely on them as much. Well, I got to say, of the three, I really prefer Linux to the other operating systems. When it comes to like watching Twitch videos and stuff, any one of them is fine. When it comes to coding, I just want to use Linux. Things seem a lot slower on Windows. I think the file system is a little bit slower. Starting processes is a little bit slower. It has been at least a decade since I have used Eclipse for anything. Oh, and I can get some questions here. I want to set up Sublime Text for web development. At this point, my recommendation for this, and I don't do a ton of web development myself, although I am dabbling with it on my Twitch channel, and I don't know if I actually set something up like this, so I'm just going to do this. Maybe something will actually come of that, maybe it won't. If it doesn't, search on Twitch, look for ODAT Nerd. I'm totally there. My recommendation at this point in time would be get yourself Sublime Text 4, which you can get from the Sublime Text Discord. Hello, Ashwin, which is what I'm using here. This is build 4101. Install the LSP package and then install the LSP tools for whichever languages you're going to be using, like HTML or JavaScript or TypeScript. And what you'll end up with is an editor that, pardon me, is Sublime Text and has native performance, but has the same code completion abilities more or less as Visual Studio Code does. It's using Visual Studio Code uses LSP servers behind the scenes to provide language intelligence for specific languages that you're working with. There's a package for Sublime Text that does the same thing, and the one for Sublime Text 4 is a head and shoulders cooler, I think. I haven't really used a ton of it myself, something I'm getting into for videos on the channel, but there's been a lot of back and forth between the Sublime Text developers and the developers of the LSP package, which has actually guided some portions of the Sublime Text API. New things have been added to it to make interacting with LSP for the LSP plugin a lot more seamless. So that would be the way that I would go for something like that. And that's more or less along the lines of saying install package, and then you got to wait for the long list of packages to install. And while we're doing that, Ashwin and everybody, how has your day been today? I have to go back to work tomorrow, but I had today and yesterday off, so that was a fun time. It's kind of weird. I'm going to miss sleeping in an extra 10 minutes every day. The steps for setting something like this up is first to install this LSP package, which gives you the core support for LSP, and then choose one of the LSP packages for what you're using. Like there is one for Angular. You're going to find one in here for HTML. There's going to be one for JavaScript down in here somewhere. This is the one for Python. There are more of these than appear here. These are just the ones that have helpers that make it easier to install. You're going to need Node.js installed, and restart Sublime after you do it, and you're pretty much good to go. Everything should more or less be very intuitive, I would think, if you're used to tools like that. Trying to use Sublime for Android game development. Nice. Yeah, I have not done anything in that regard for a while. And I have to say, I think, if I'm being honest with myself, the reason I got out of wanting to play with Android development had a lot to do with how Android emulators back in the day, I don't know if this is still the case because it's been a while, were like emulating ARM slowly. So you could have a variety of different types of devices, but it was just absolutely mind-bogglingly terrible to have the Android emulator running. On the flip side of that, doing iOS development, Apple really knows where it's at with an interpreter environment that is really fast and snappy and just running native code. I love the API for working on iOS. I love the language and the tools and how easy and iterative it is. I just wish it wasn't iOS at the end of the day. Do you have a channel here on YouTube, Neon Tuts? Or Toots, as the case may be? With a name like that, I'm thinking perhaps you also do maybe tutorial videos here on YouTube. Getting used to having coffee in the morning? Oh, instead of tea? I mean, I know how to get it going on here. I have tea in one, coffee in another, and then water in a third. I'm all wired up. For all that I've been on vacation and I haven't really stepped foot in the office here for more than 12 seconds at a time since the stream on Friday on Twitch, I have been going to bed rather late these last few days. So we may not go past 2 hours on the stream tonight. Oops. No other questions came through, I'm guessing. If that is as clever as it seems like it might be. So I do get questions in a variety of places. YouTube, direct messages, and the like. For example, I should probably check here just to see. You seems to think that the stream is not going. You can still hear me, right? And see me and such. I'll just fire off a response there. Now that I have my own Discord, I'm trying to keep an eye on stuff. I have not used Swift. I will say the code that we've been working on for the past 20 years is Linux code that is written in Objective-C because it was originally based on stuff written for NextOS. But when the company wanted to do some iOS development, I got tapped for that because at the time Swift wasn't a thing yet, or at least not a publicly commonly used thing. Prevailing wisdom was if you wanted an iOS application, it had to be written in Objective-C, and I was one of the few people in the company that actually was familiar with the language. So I got in doing that, and I think over the course of the time that project was running, Swift started being a thing that you could use if you wanted, but we never went that way because timelines, and I already knew Objective-C. But yeah, indeed it is, isn't it? English breakfast tea, some hazelnut French vanilla coffee, and then this is just a large quantity of icy water because you never know. It's actually kind of warm in here at the moment, what with being at the nexus of the computer universe. If you've seen the picture in the Discord, and I know you have, Ashwin, there's a laptop here, a laptop there, a laptop there, 3 computers under the desk. We're really focusing in. I have some sort of weird metabolic thing where coffee does not, or caffeine, I should say, doesn't keep me awake the way that, as some people say that they drink a cup of coffee and then they can't go to sleep at night. I could fall asleep in the chair sitting up with the lights on after drinking a pot of coffee. That's never been a problem. My bigger problem with going to bed at night is I have so many things that I'd like to work on that I lose track of time and go into all hours of the day and night fighting code problems until I look up and realize it's 1:30 in the morning and I have to get up at 6 for work, and then I'm dragging for the remainder of the next day. Drinking coffee never seems to really perk me up all that much. But, you still got to do it because you never know. Yeah, I think that question is just lost. I wish I could find it. If I do, I probably, like I said, I've probably answered that one in particular. Oh, actually, let's get rid of this for the time being. The other thing to mention about doing this is if you're going to use Terminus Open, you could use the origami package to make it split the window and move builds around, but there's definitely a video for that one on the channel here. And I think I might need to revisit that for just a little bit. At this point we're just sort of answering questions. I did have a couple of questions, well, one in particular that someone had asked on YouTube that I had queued up because I thought it would be fun to go over it here, and then I could provide a link to the thing. But right before the stream started, the MacBook where I had that open because I was getting everything ready in the little stream manager over here decided to reboot itself, and that file didn't come back. And now I think the person deleted their comment, which leads me to believe that the question as they were asking it was answered by the video I just referenced on supercharging builds in Terminus and having them be in split views. Happens from time to time. People will ask questions on YouTube, and then when I go to actually reply to them, YouTube can't find them anymore. I think that was the case. But apart from that, no real plans per se for the evening because we're in this sort of weird, exciting Sublime Text 4 is maybe right around the corner, which does remind me. I mentioned this earlier in the Discord. I've been thinking for a while that something that it would be fun to do for the channel at large, the YouTube channel, with Sublime Text 4 coming out at some point, would be to give away a license to Sublime Text 4 for somebody that watches on the channel. Maybe somebody that wants Sublime and can't afford it, or someone that has an older Sublime Text 3 license that might need upgrading and they don't have the money for that, just to give back to the community. I've been pondering this for a while, but I do not know how to run a contest like that? What in the sense of, motivating people, what would you do to get entries into the contest? But what brought this to a head was the announcement last Tuesday, a week ago today, when Sublime HQ put out that teaser trailer that we covered a little bit in the video yesterday, publicly announcing to the world at large that Sublime Text 4 is around, or upcoming, although it's been around for us for, like a year and 4 months or a year and 5 months or so at this point, if you happen to have been in the Discord on the day that John originally dropped it in like November of 2019, I think, because it was all of 2020, and now these formats here, maybe November 2019, if I'm remembering the dates correctly. Now that it's actually public, maybe that makes even more sense. And I was actually contacted by someone who would like to remain anonymous, but offered to donate licenses for a giveaway like that. So I could do something like that, and now I could give away like 2 licenses instead of just 1, or 3 instead of 1, or something. So for that purpose, is that something that you guys think would be interesting? How would you go about that? Have you seen a YouTube channel do something like that? What would you normally do to get engagement for something like that? Because on YouTube, unlike on Twitch, where the full information of everybody who's following you or everybody who is subscribed to you at a monetary level, which is different from how it works here on YouTube. On YouTube, there is, pardon me, a list of some people that are subscribed to me, but not everybody, because your YouTube account is tied to your Google account, and you might like to subscribe to a channel without making it publicly aware that you do, for any number of reasons. So the number of people that are subscribed to the channel right now, as of the latest check on the dashboard here, if I was to just reload the studio, is 1,644, but only the smallest of small fraction of those are actually names that are visible to me if I was to look. So saying, would you like to enter to win this copy of Sublime Text? Subscribe to the channel. That's not something that's going to help. Leave a comment, tweet something with a hashtag. How does this sort of thing work? If anybody has any ideas for something like that, I'm all ears. Let's go back through some questions here. Joseph Lyons asked for Terminus, any cool features to know about. Ashwin said, I actually want to say some sort of small problem statement with plugins, but not everybody participating may know Sublime API to do it. For something here in the stream, feel free to drop something like that. We can talk about a bunch of stuff. And Abhinav says, I try to work on my game project, but eventually I end up playing some other game and stay up late playing games. Yeah. I actually kind of have a reverse problem for that sort of thing. I have a lot of projects that I'd like to work on. My HyperHelp system, for example, which is this thing here for displaying the Sublime Text API. This works. It's a very good proof of concept. It's 98% developed. There's some stuff that I'd like to do, but I was sort of holding off because I was waiting for changes that are going to happen in Sublime Text 4. The help that's in it is a little bit out of date. I haven't had a chance to do stuff, but by and large, this is something that I'd like to work a little bit more on. But I have the override audit package, which we saw previously at the start of the stream, that does a variety of things, not the least of which is showing you a list of all the packages, whether or not they have dependencies or anything. File Manager, for example, has one dependency on this, and that's a dependency. I actually have some games I'd like to play, but I can't find time to play the games because I'm too busy working on all of these projects. Retweets for participating. Yeah, that seems like the way to go for something like that. It does indeed look like the VI help. That was very much the motivation for how I originally started with this a few years ago, and it sort of snowballed from there. So as a matter of fact, the ultimate goal, there's like a lot of help here. This is the help for the help system in general, how to use it. there's all, for example, well, that's the change log for the thing, seeing how far back these versions go, 2019, but that's the first time one of these change logs was in here. There's also the authoring system, the API, help for build systems and color schemes. Any package could have one of these things. In fact, somebody on Sublime Text Discord, Gwenzek, has something that converts the Python documentation into this format to be able to view it in here. Another reason to work for something like that as well. I like it for being able to look at the documentation in Sublime so I don't get distracted by looking at a web browser. Let's go back first to the question that Joseph Lyons had that said, you keep hearing about Terminus. Well, there's a lot to be said about it, I assume. It works across Windows, Linux, and Mac OS seamlessly across the three. So if you want to have a terminal open directly inside of Sublime, the way some editors can, instead of having a command prompt that's open in another window that you switch to, Terminus would be the way to do something like that. There's a couple things we can do. We can open the default shell in a tab, so that's just right up here. We can, see various things. Here's my contents of my temp directory. There's a lot of yarn stuff in here at the moment. You can also open default shell in a panel if you want to have one down at the bottom of the window instead, which is perhaps more like what you might expect for the purposes of a terminal in Sublime. Again, we can do the exact same thing here. This has different color schemes you can apply to it. You can add key bindings to open and close these things like so. And as we just saw there, and I don't know that I have an example of this per se, if we did new build system, again, we can say echo hello, for example. If I save this as delete me so that I remembered to delete it, and then I have to go into the menu and go into tools, build system, and swap that to be delete me to make sure this is the build that executes. Normal build system displays down there in a panel at the bottom of the window, but if you have Terminus installed, it's as easy as saying Terminus exec and cancel Terminus cancel build, like so. And now the build is running in Terminus instead. Why is that important? Because this is an actual terminal. If you were running a program that was interactive in some way that requests input from the user, Terminus is a way to do that. Standard build system output in this window. Well, that's not going to do it. Hang on. Shift escape build results. This is just a dumb output. It doesn't support any sort of color coding or cursor manipulation or input. It just shows you the output of a program. If you want to do anything interactive, you want to do something like Terminus, as we see here, or here. And you can also, as we saw earlier, if you change this to Terminus open and then say, what was the thing that we put in there? Auto close false. And delete that, because if you want to cancel the build running in a tab, now the build is running right out here, just like this. And if you look at the README page for this, it also has the ability to use Terminus or origami to split the view and move the build to the right, so you can be writing code on the left and building on the right. All personally, the reasons that I use something like this, I do still use clearly standard terminals for a lot of stuff. If I was doing something in a more long-term fashion, I would run it here. A lot of stuff I run there, but there's no denying that being able to quickly hit a key and run a couple of simple shell commands and then exit and be back in Sublime without alt-tabbing away can be a real time saver if you're into that sort of thing. So there's that. What was your problem statement for plugins, Ashwin? And yeah, regarding giveaways, it seems like on the face of it, something that would promote the channel at large, right? Come view my videos, get a copy of Sublime Text. I don't know how I might do something like that in a way that drives subscriptions. I mean, I could ask that you subscribe or like a video or share a video or something. I suppose that could be a thing. Share your favorite Sublime Text video from the channel on Twitter with this hashtag just to try to spread the news. That's probably the smarter way to go about that. But I'm figuring that the best result would be to have some sort of Twitter hashtag associated with it, gather up all of those tweets, and then live have it randomly select one and hand that information out. But I have never run one of those myself, so I don't know if there's a better way to do that sort of thing, or for that matter, the timing of it. I imagine you probably want a couple of weeks for a channel as small as mine, minimum, maybe even 3 weeks to give news a chance to build ahead. I probably got to dump notifications in a variety of places. This is one of those things where if you have information on something like that, if you've ever done it before, if you've ever participated in one, win or lose, that seemed like it was run fairly intelligently, let me know in the comments of a video, in a direct message, on the Discord. If this ever pops up, that's the link to my Discord, but Sublime Text Discord works just as well. Write a framework for the giveaway. Hey, Hacky Sack's our framework guy. If he can't do it, something that rhymes with guy. There's ways to do it on Twitch, but this is fully in support of my YouTube friends and family here on these streams, and not on Twitch streams. That's a whole other beast altogether. I can say that the Monday's video on Sublime Text 4 being officially announced is officially the first ranking by views 1 of 10 in the top 10 of videos on my channel. For some reason, the YouTube integration with Discord seems a bit wonky. Oh, is it not displaying anything right now? It was very briefly. I was very intrigued by that whole operation. That's an unfortunate turn of events. Here, I'm going to do a thing here. Normally, I set a custom status for that and say the YouTube thing, and then say I thought that might be a new thing. Streaming on YouTube. Because I'm pretty sure it hadn't done it before. Does it do that for Twitch too? Have you noticed? It seems to have slightly better integration for Twitch because that's more for gamers. But I don't remember before today it ever showing up for YouTube. But I don't know if maybe it was intermittently on and off doing that, and it just never actually showed anything. That is hard to say. Mr. Lyons, did I answer your question about Terminus? Do you have anything any other questions you might like to ask about that? There is a couple of videos on the channel, and if you look in the README for the Terminus package, both of them are actually linked there. That makes them, if I did get link, I can actually do this. The two most viewed videos on the channel are these two right here related to Terminus. You can get some water here for a second. Snoring puppy is snoring. I would say this video, if you haven't already seen it, is a good walkthrough for Terminus in general, the things that you can do with it. It is a year and a bit old now, but all the information that's in it is still relevant. And let's go back one. I did by tag, didn't I? Shoot. I don't want to do it by tag. I want to do it this way. And for more information on using it in a build system like we did here in this very quick example, I would recommend this video, which talks about how to take any existing build system and convert it to Terminus, which is very straightforward. It mostly just involves adding a target line and maybe the cancel key if you want to be able to cancel the build. to get something to run in a panel. A couple of arguments like we covered here if you wanted to, run in a tab instead. And then what to do if your build uses a couple of these standard build keys that Terminus doesn't support. It's a very easy conversion to get yourself up and running with that thing. Interestingly, in the Discord today, there was mention of someone, I want to say Matt Demo, looking to get the Sublime REPL package by Wub into under the control of the Sublime Text organization, which isn't Sublime HQ, that's a different thing, to try and make it compatible with Sublime Text 4 because, or not compatible, but update it, if you will, because it hasn't been actively being maintained for 6 years. I would love to know if there's someone watching this now live, or if you happen to watch this after the fact, do you use Sublime REPL? And if so, what features does it actually provide that Terminus doesn't? Because it seems to me, based on the limited amount of experience I have with Sublime REPL, I've really only ever installed it to help people that were having problems with it. Anything that Sublime REPL can do, Terminus can do, and it's a lot easier to configure Terminus, and Terminus can actually be just a standard terminal in a way that I don't think Sublime REPL can. So I'm not sure why one would want to revive it is a bad word, but maintain it and bring it up to a level when it's basically doing the same thing that Terminus is doing, and Terminus does more and is more maintained by its original author. I have to imagine that something as complicated as either of these two packages isn't the sort of thing where someone that's not intimately familiar with the code base can just pop in and immediately start writing some code for it, right? If I had to guess. Again, that is just me on that one. There was an update to the documentation, the official documentation too. Yeah, Terminus is indeed lucky for the channel. I say the largest videos by a large stretch are the Terminus videos with regards to views and likes. In fact, for a very long time, Terminus video had a ridiculous number of likes and no dislikes. And then someone said, hey, how come can you believe this video doesn't have any dislikes? And that kind of opened the floodgates on that one. One thing I like about Sublime REPL is that it opens in a file, so I always have all the logs that I can scroll through. Well, technically, yeah, let's do something like this. Let's delete this. This is a fun thing to play with in stream, because if you have used it, maybe we can work a little bit on this here. So we would say something like this. We want to run something that is interactive. That is, that we can put some input into and see responses. So we know we can't use a standard build system for that because build systems just display output. They don't accept input. So we would need to use Sublime REPL for it or Terminus. So, and again, this is one of those matter of perspective things and what seems easier. But if we wanted to set something like this up with Terminus, we could say new build system, like so. And I added this to the command palette. If you were to do this the other way, we would find it under Tools, Build System, and then at the bottom of the menu, way down at the bottom of the screen here, there's an item that says New Build System. That's where that comes from. The command that you would execute in order to make Python interactive would be something like this, right? Python -i. This would be a standard build system for something like this. We might also say that we want to whoops. Oh, sorry. We have to save this first. Hang on. In order to get the power of package dev to make our lives a little bit easier. Let's say we'll call this Python REPL, for example. Now that I've saved the file, package dev has taken over syntax highlighting, so it's going to add some extra functionality here that Core Sublime doesn't have. One of those would be that we want this to be source.python so that this build automatically applies for Python files. Maybe we add a $i in here, but we'll worry about that later. Now, by default, right now, this is enough for this to work, but it'll run in the build at the bottom of the window. And as we can see here, if I was to, for our purposes here, I'm going to set the build system specifically under Tools Build System to Python REPL, because this isn't a Python file right now. Probably makes sense to make this run a file, right? If I hit the key, this looks like a REPL environment, but no matter what I type into this, nothing actually happens. And that's because this is only for displaying output. It doesn't do anything else. If you're familiar with running programs in the general case, you might know the idea of standard input and standard output. Output and standard error being the place where displays go. Standard input is where input comes from. That's not connected to this panel. The fact that you can click in here and type is just a side effect of things. So this isn't something that's going to work for us right now. So I'm going to cancel that particular build. But what we can do is this. We can say the target is, because I have installed the Terminus package, Terminus exec, and we're also going to say cancel. It's going to be Terminus cancel build, as we've seen in the previous example, like so. Okay. And now just like that, when I hit this, this is Python. And it's doing exactly what we want here. Now this isn't in a file, like you said, and Ashwin says, one pro of Sublime REPL is that it comes built with a REPL for many languages. Yeah, this is true. That is a plus side for it. The downside for it, as far as I've seen, again, I just have a limited knowledge of this, is that in order to create a build system, here for this example here, we can just add target and cancel, and life is like pretty good for us, and everything else works exactly the way that a normal build would. So if you understand how build systems work, doing this is really easy. The way that you do this in Sublime REPL, on the other hand, a lot more complicated, because there's a line in here that references the main menu file that contains the entry that has the command that knows how to run this. It's kind of, to my mind, backwards. There should be a build system that knows how to run interactive Python and a menu item that knows how to run that build. But instead, the menu item runs the build, and then there's a build system that runs it based on the menu. It's sort of a weird thing. But the thing that Abhinav said is it runs it in a file. So this isn't running in a file right now, right? So that's not what we want for that. So that's easy enough to do. We can just say Terminus open here, and then we don't need Terminus cancel. The cancel key is for being able to cancel a build, being able to go to use this menu item. You need to do that if it's running in a panel. You don't need that if it's running in a tab, because if it's running in a tab and you want to cancel the build, you just close the tab. So with this, now my Python is running in a tab, just like so. And if I was to type quit, well, it goes away. So that's not what we want either. But as we already saw in this other thing, we can say auto close, and we can say false. Please don't auto close this. Now when I run it, I can say 1 plus 2 is 3, quit, and there we go. This is still here. We can split the window, drag this over to here. This is a file. I can copy the stuff out of here and paste it over here if I want. We can create a brand new file and paste it in there. Well, I probably shouldn't have pushed the build key for that one. Boop, like so. So in this case, that is very easy to do. And you could also add, something like this $file to this to get it to actually run the current file when it's a Python file, and then it would run it and drop into interactive mode. I don't know if I have an example of that. Let's say hello world, like so. Save that as in my home directory as repl.py, for example, just for our own purposes. If I build this, it said hello world, and then I can, still do stuff. Type quit. Still here in the file. If I was to quit Sublime, which I have to do from a menu while that's open, and then restart it from the item up here, those are still there. All that output still remains from the previous run. Oh, did he actually respond to that? That's interesting. I've been riding this particular horse for the better part of a year because one of the most commonly asked questions about Sublime is, why does my program not run? And the answer is, the program is interactive. You got to use something like Terminus or Sublime REPL. Whenever I answer that question, I say you could use Terminus or Sublime REPL. I prefer Terminus. It's a lot more straightforward to configure as compared to Sublime REPL is for the same thing. As I say, because it uses a standard build system. It does require you to know that Python -i is for going interactive with Python for this one, or for R or whatnot. I happen to be of the opinion that if you're using a programming language, whatever it is, that it's a good idea to understand the tools that you're using, which is one of the reasons why I'm not a super fan of all-encompassing IDEs for the get-go for a beginner. It's really a weird, slippery slope to be a C developer and have to know the ins and outs of compiling a C program to an object file, then invoking the linker to link the object file with appropriate libraries to come up with the executable. That's an extra bit of stuff to know on top of being able to write hello world in C. But it really seems to me like you should have the knowledge of the tools of the language that you're using. And if you use an IDE that takes too much of that away from you and doesn't, at the very least, offer you the choice to change things and show you what it's going to do, and then you could change it if you know how and leave well enough alone if you don't, you end yourself up in a situation where if you don't have that particular tool at your disposal, you can't work anymore because you don't know how the stuff that you're doing has been working all this time. So for that reason, I totally agree that Sublime REPL is a lot handier because it does have that stuff built in, but it really seems like you should get a little handle on this. It doesn't take a lot. That's just my particular take on that thing. And now that this is a file here, we'll have to blump all that stuff out. But yeah, that is entirely possible. And we can also, instead, we have to look at the Terminus documentation, but you can make it split the window as well, which I think is one of the things Sublime REPL does. One thing that Sublime REPL does that I'm not a fan of personally from all the, times I've seen it, is, and it's not going to work here because of the way Terminus works, but I guess we could do something like this. If I selected all this, if this was a Sublime REPL window, it would have the syntax for Python, which I guess is cool for when you're doing something like that. You get to see syntax highlighting, but you also get to see syntax highlighting for these things that clearly aren't code, which just looks wrong to me, but I'm kind of OCD for that sort of thing. There shouldn't be a limit to Terminus in how far back that it can go. And as we saw here, I quit and restarted. This one remains everything that will have happened in here. It might be. I don't think I actually have that installed. I personally don't, but yeah, easy enough to just swap that in here, I would guess. Is it just a sort of a drop-in replacement for something like that? For purposes of that, I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, this video, which sort of goes through some of the stuff that we just covered here, sort of impromptu, including setting this up and having sort of a little minimal plugin, which is just one way to do it, where you could actually hit a key in here to build, have the REPL open over here and run the code from this file, and then still interact with the REPL, and then also come over here, select some code and hit Control Enter and have it send the code that you selected over to the REPL to execute it and keep running, which I think is probably pretty handy. I don't know if that's something Sublime REPL does out of the box, but it seemed to me if I was going to have something that had a REPL environment in my editor, I'd want the ability to do that. You could just embed an IPython in your original code. Oh, I see what you're saying. For something like that, Terminus is not going to allow you to turn on syntax highlighting. As we can see here, if you look down at the bottom of the window, this tab is, well, it says plain text now, but I can change it to whatever I like. It's not really going to matter in here. It's going to stay as plain text, because what Terminus is doing behind the scenes is capturing all output from the running program and interpreting it the same way that the terminal would. So CLS sends the ANSI sequence for clearing the screen. It will remove all text from the buffer and clear the screen. Or it can move the cursor to a specific spot and write some text there, adding in any white space as needed to make it work inside of Sublime. So unless IPython generates syntax highlighted code on its own in a regular terminal, I'm not sure that that would work in Terminus. Seems like something that would probably work, though, I would have to imagine. Yeah, and that's only if that actually matters. Like I say, the idea of seeing this output syntax highlighted is disturbing to me, because it's treating these as numbers and these as strings, but really they're not Python code. That just happens to be the closest match for them. And that bothers me and my old man OCD. That's probably the sort of thing that doesn't bother the average person. But I have never used IPython. I will say that. But I've also pointed out that I was exposed to Python many years ago. It never really caught on with me as a scripting language. I think I sort of lumped it in with Perl at the time, unfairly so. This was a time where if you ever went looking for a Linux program to do a thing, chances were good that at least one of the top 5 hits was some super complicated Perl script that somebody had written that required you to download and install only 3/4 of every module on CPAN in a certain order before the script would run. Which is why, 2 reasons why I never got into Perl. One is the syntax seemed kind of terse, and I never really had much of a use for that sort of scripting language. And also, it's an environment where it has a language that I would gather has a library that's so not rich that it's impossible to write anything non-trivial without pulling in external modules, and I can never remember how that worked. And I think back in the day, with my brief exposure to Python, that in my head I had the same idea that this isn't something that I would want to use because I'm going to have to be installing libraries all over the case, which isn't actually true. Python has a really nice batteries included environment. But I didn't really know that per se until I started using Sublime Text, because you use Python to script inside of Sublime. And that's what got me using Python in the first place. And I ended up doing nothing but Python coding as a hobby for 3 years as a result. Oh, cool. I will check that out. Let's see. It covers in a tab as well. I dropped an example in the, oops, pardon me. Purely for those moments when you want to know, I can do this, right? Let me check. Yeah. I mean, it is very common for me. Let's say most of the languages I know, and I know a lot of languages, some better than others based on usage and experience. Some that I've technically know but haven't used in so long I've forgotten. Node and JavaScript isn't really one of them, because I've traditionally never really done much. Before Node.js existed, JavaScript was something that you did to make your web browsing experience in a page more robust, more live, more rich, whatever term you want to use. Never really a fan of making a web page because I don't have the talent to make anything visual that looks nice. I'm more of a back-end code guy than a front end, what shape should my buttons be kind of guy. It always irritated the bejeebers out of me that in order to make a web page that looked correct, you have to write one version for Chrome and then another version for Firefox and then another version for Safari and then another version for Internet Explorer and another version for Opera, if I haven't already said that. That's like 6 or 5 different almost but not quite same versions of stuff. I got no patience for that sort of thing. I just want to write something and it either works or it doesn't. And JavaScript sort of fell into that hole. If I'm not going to make a web page and do a lot of JavaScript. Now, of course, you can use it on the back end as well. So while I know the language, it's not one of those under my belt to know it like the back of my hand kinds of languages. So that's why on my Twitch streams, I've been working on doing some more stuff with that. But I love the idea of having Terminus to be able to have this terminal to run a quick command or, add a few numbers together if I want to do something like that, some sort of complicated thing. Run Python to run a quick little script, although all else being equal, I would probably use the Sublime console for that unless I was using a specific library, or running Node and testing a quick little idea for something as I'm working on it and then going back to stuff. So in that regard, I'm totally with you on IPython and how that works. And I love how the term Sublime by default doesn't have a terminal built in, because by the wishes of the developer, it's a text editor, not the be all and end all of all things, which is like, it's one of those things that I love about Sublime Text. They focused on one thing, editing files and tasks related to editing files. Do that as well as possible. Provide a rich API to be able to add on to that. And one of the things that someone has been able to add on to that is a terminal. This doesn't need to be built into the core. That's going to take time away from the core of Sublime. Someone has created a thing to do this very thing. It's one of the things I love about Sublime. But also how easy it is to just plug this stuff in and stay right inside of Sublime. This isn't something that the developers of Sublime intended, I would imagine, when they created this functionality. User ingenuity has created the ability to make these tools work exactly the way that we like. Is showing my ignorance. Is IPython a separate project from standard Python, which I'm gathering is CPython? As again, I don't know like a ton about the history of it. Little bits and pieces, but because I wasn't following it for a long time, I don't know as much about that as I might about Lua, for example. Also, I don't know if I said, but glad you woke up, Hacky. Just extends the rig. Gotcha. And we got all kinds of tabs over here. Let's see. Ow. Hang on a second. I think we can do this. I think we can put a tab over here. And then if I click over here, I can do this. And this. And then if I close the Discord, we'll be able to see these things. So they should be more or less in there. I'm going to zoom that up a little bit. And maybe we also sort of make this window size to the left here. These are the images that Hacky Sack shared in the Discord, showing an example of IPython, which is not something that I'm familiar with. I'm familiar with it in as much as Hacky Sack shares a lot of images like this in the channel. But I've actually seen examples of repos that have the numbers in brackets like that, but I've never used one myself. I've always just used standard Python or the Sublime console for something like that. I assume this is using Terminus. Have I worked with Lua for Android games? I have not, but I have done a lot of work in embedding Lua in general in applications. Cool. So there you go. If this is the sort of thing that you'd like to see, this is definitely possible with Terminus. And because Terminus is basically just a plugin that's manipulating a tab in a file as if it was a terminal, but really it's still a file, you still get that ability to keep the content of this around. You could save it to disk and reload it later, get all of those logs and stuff. In for Terminus, it's in for Terminus, inits for Terminus. We got what you mean. So going back to Lua, for Android games, no. All the Android games that I've created fell into the two realms of I was using libgdx, which just sort of automatically works for all of the platforms that you're going to use it for if you use the abstractions properly, or it was a web-based game that I just displayed in like a system web view. Just because we were talking about this, I can't remember. If we do a little something like this, I'm going to apologize for your eyes and how I just burned your retina out. But this is an example of the sorts of game development that I was doing in WebStorm back in the day. As a matter of fact, this is an older version of this because this is written in JavaScript. And I started on a project to rewrite this in TypeScript, which started by creating the game engine for this in TypeScript. Basically, this is completely 100% custom code. It's not using any libraries or anything except maybe jQuery to click on buttons or something. But the content of this itself is, well, this is me just clicking around in debug mode here and moving myself around, apparently. That makes that a lot easier. I escaped the room in a way that I didn't intend. This is all custom code. So I created a game engine in JavaScript. Then I thought, you know what, this would actually be better in TypeScript instead. I want to learn TypeScript. So I started using WebStorm and converted the engine code to TypeScript. And it was around in there that I was starting to get irritated, going back to that story from earlier in the stream, with WebStorm and other related tools of that ilk. Because, well, for one thing, while I was learning TypeScript, I took stuff from the actual TypeScript handbook and put it in there, and their code intelligence tools told me that it wasn't going to do what it said it was going to do, even though it arguably did it, and I reported that as a bug, and they said, yeah, sure, whatever. I mean, the code still runs fine. Why do you care that the code intelligence is telling you that you have a bug? And the answer to that question is because I can't rely on code intelligence tools to be correct if I can't rely on code intelligence tools to be correct. This is one of the things that sort of kicked me over into using Sublime. It all works out okay. The genesis of this, not that this has anything to do with Sublime Text, but I did reference it earlier, is that the arrow that's red represents a bad guy who is a guard, if you will, who's on patrol. Each one of these black squares represents routes on his patrol, waypoints, if you will. And he is set to navigate between these points. That's all programmatically done. And if we just sit here, I think, I can't remember what the control is for doing nothing. Enter to do nothing. You can actually see this guy slowly making his way through the level, turning around, navigating, and so on. And he has a little vision cone, because that's what you do in these games. And he's just going to keep doing that forever. And the idea for us as the user, the player of the game here, is that these controls control something in the level, like opening the door, but they only stay open for so long. So part of the puzzle is you have to follow the guard out the door, and so on. sort of a fun little thing. I really should get back to this. Might be something I do on one of the Twitch streams. But this is the sort of thing where I would have used Lua if I wasn't doing web-based stuff. I actually have an example of that, but it's not compiled, where I was recreating Dragon Warrior for NES, but on a computer, using the same music. And the game engine that I created for that used Lua for some scripting. But I haven't worked on that in quite some time, because I switched to doing web development stuff like that thing I just showed you, for the purposes of being able to work on it here in this room and then just take it over to the Windows computer in the other room. Really is a matter of the ease at which you can move from machine to machine is why I decided to do that. So as much as I'm not a fan of web development, I am a fan of that. But we have reached the 2-hour point in the stream, and if nobody has any other questions, I think we may call it here, because despite the fact that I have drank half of this coffee and a quarter of that tea, I am still feeling quite sleepy, and I do have to go back to work for tomorrow. And if I'm recalling things that I saw going by on my phone that I conscientiously objected to because I was on vacation, someone has some problems with Git that may need unwinding. I'm going to thank everybody for showing up here as we sit around in our bare butt t-shirts, haha, a funny pun, working with Sublime Text. Super excited about how Sublime Text 4 is publicly announced now, and we don't know when it's actually going to be released, but the fact that it's being made public now after a year of quietly working behind the scenes means that they're getting closer to the wider audience. There's still some small niggling issues. For example, the build that came out, build 4100 on macOS, had a little bit of a rendering regression with respect to window captions. Also on Windows, but there was a build that came out right away that fixed it for Windows. As I've said in many videos on the channel, this is a development build that I'm running right now, but I can count on one hand the number of times where there was any build that had a problem that wasn't like immediately fixed in the next couple of hours. It either came out while I was awake, or I thought, oh, well, that's unfortunate, that's kind of crashy, but it's bedtime, and then I go to bed and wake up and discover that there's a new build that resolves the problem. So the development builds are really rather stable. All else being equal, you can always stay on one and not immediately move yourself ahead until a couple of days to make sure. But there is so much cool stuff to Sublime Text 4 that needs to be talked about and described in the video. I'm excited to do it, mildly daunted about actually coming up with the content in a way that is interesting to people. You know, how do we split this content up? And the idea of giving away a couple of licenses for Sublime Text. Maybe more than that, maybe more than just 2 if more people step up and want to throw in on the pot. Or maybe Sublime Merge is something that we could give a license away for too, even though that's not something I've covered extensively on the channel. It is an exciting time for stuff like this. And thanks everybody who is watching the live stream now, who watches it after the fact, who subscribes to the channel and watches the videos when they comes out and asks the questions that we saw earlier in the video. That I get a lot of those in the comments and in direct messages on various platforms like the Discord and Stack Overflow and such like that. Well, not direct messages on Stack Overflow, but you get the idea. I'm everywhere, and people ask a lot of questions, and the stuff that we do here on the channel all comes down to you guys. So thank you so much for all of your support on that. I will be going live tomorrow and Friday on Twitch, twitch.tv/ODatNerd. I'm unremarkable. There should be a link to it down in the description as well. If you want to just hang out and watch actual development stuff, you can still ask questions there as well. We tend to chat a fair bit while we're struggling through working on some web development. If I see you on one of those streams, awesome. Glad to see you there. If I don't see you until the next live stream or the next video, that is awesome too. And from me here in the west coast of Canada, where it's 10 o'clock and time to go to bed, this is ODatNerd saying thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Ayush, for for hanging out. I hope I answered your question there. Have a sublime week, everyone. A sublime week. And I'm going to end the button. One of the things we're going to work on Twitch, a new layout for this control panel, which maybe we'll have buttons that work a little bit better when I press them.